Right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am going to just give folks a couple of seconds so the waiting room can settle, be let in, and then we will begin.
Olivia, and just one question. Since I'm the mediator, should I just, say welcome to everybody, or are you gonna do that?
You'll take over after I'm done with the housekeeping slide.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so speaking of the housekeeping slide, so welcome everyone to the Connecting Urban Communities to Waterways session. My name's Olivia Lawarn. I'm with the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed, and we just have a few housekeeping notes for everyone to take note of before we begin. So this session will be recorded and will be shared on the Coalition webpage within the next couple of weeks. All attendees are going to be muted by the host. If you'd like to share like a question, you can put it in the chat and we'll be monitoring that. The chat will be open so you can post both publicly and directly message folks. If you're having any technical issues, please message me, Olivia Lawarn, again, directly in the chat box, and I will do my best to help you out. And if you'd like to see the rest of the forum schedule, you can visit delawareriverwatershedforum.sketch.com, and I will include that link in the chat at the end of the session so you know what's happening next. This session will be using interactive slides towards the end. So I'm going to share the link for the slides now if you'd like to open them in your browser in advance, and we'll share them again later in the session when the time comes for you to open them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator.
Sorry, I was muted. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Just introducing myself real quick. My name is Noilda Souza, for those of you who might be wondering how that was pronounced. I am from Brazil. I am the Environmental Education Program Director at UrbanPromise. So yeah, now I'm gonna explain a little bit about my organization to you guys. All right, so UrbanPromise is a youth development organization. We've been serving Camden in New Jersey for more than 30 years. Our mission has been to equip Camden's children and young adults with skills for academic achievement, life management, and spiritual growth. We have a few programs in our school. The first one, we have after school and summer camps. In this picture right there, you can see one of our kids in a canoe. We also have an elementary school starting with kindergarten. So in the next picture, you can see a few of our kids. Yes, there you go. And also we have a high school, and my office, the office that I'm part of, the Office of Experiential Learning, does have programs towards the high school kids. And the pictures that you see from now on are from these kids. So we have the Urban Boat Works program, in which we build boats to paddle in Camden's waterways. You can see the wooden canoes in the pictures. They're all made at Urban Boat Works. We also have the Trekkers program, in which we go in expeditions. We do bike rides and hikes along Camden's waterways. This semester, because of COVID, we cannot have any overnight trips. So instead of that, we're meeting every day with a different grade from our high school at the Cooper River Yacht Club. And we're doing, activities over there. And also we have the Environmental Education Department, which is I'm the director of. In the department, we try to do some watershed education and advocacy through 3 programs. The first one is stream stewards. We do water testing in 3 points, 2 in the Cooper River and 1 in the Delaware in the back channel. We try to do that at least twice a month. We also visit environmental centers and learn about watersheds and beyond. This semester, because of COVID, we cannot be meeting outside of the school schedule. So instead, I'm working together with our Trekkers program director. So every time we meet at the yacht club, we try to integrate, the biking activities that we're doing, or the canoeing, or the fishing, or the hikes with environmental education. And we also have the River Guides program, which is a summer program. And we employ about 8 students this semester. This past summer, we had about 9 students. And we train them so they can lead historical and ecological tours. Actually, tomorrow, we're going to be presenting a virtual tour that we do normally with the River Guides. I'll explain that a little bit at the end of my presentation now. With the River Guides, also we do a new student orientation in a CMD charter school. In this new student orientation, they oversee paddling activities, team building activities, and watershed education in this charter school in Camden. We also do community paddles. Unfortunately, this summer, we couldn't do any public paddles, because of COVID. But instead, we try to take our cameras, GoPros, and filming equipment in our paddles in the tidal Cooper River, and we prepared a virtual paddle, which we're going to be presenting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Also, the River Guides continue the water testing that normally we do with the stream stewards. So it's good that we have a continuity on that. Yeah, in that picture, you can see actually them testing water. This is the water from the lake. Yeah, so our programs this summer and now the semester were impacted by COVID-19, but we try to do our best to integrate environmental education in any activity that we do. Yeah, so I believe that's it for my presentation. Tomorrow we have the virtual paddle, so I hope to see you guys there. And the pictures that you see from now on are all from the summer paddles that we did with River Guides. Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
And all right. So our next presentation is going to be by Scott Quitel. He's a founder of the Land Health Institute. He's also the director of social entrepreneurship at the Close School of Entrepreneurship at Drexel University. So is Scott there?
Yeah, I am. Hi, everyone.
All right, welcome, Scott. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First off, what I wanted to do is really take the time I have to kind of delve into an issue. But can you just, you have 1 or 2 slides that we shared with you that you can put up? I can talk to them and then I'll, so we're a nonprofit in Philadelphia that where we are really focused on putting nature back as our mission, and we do that through like all kinds of education that's unconventional. So by that we do very immersive, hands-on, exploration-based education.
So you can.
Oh, am I back? I just got muted. Sorry about that. So we do very immersive kinds of education, and then we also we try to apply what we learn on the ground. So land health got started by seeing the big disconnect between nature and people, and especially in urban environments, Philadelphia having 40,000 vacant lots. And so so we intersperse our education with actual on the ground activity. And so we have a native plant nursery at 49th and Parkside in West Philadelphia. And then we also do different projects in North Philadelphia, Southwest Philadelphia, where we see vacant land as an opportunity to kind of simultaneously do a lot of things. You can instill nature, add more nature back. You can also, you can use it as a teaching platform. And then you can also interweave, and this is me using some of my entrepreneurial background as a director of social entrepreneurship, interweave local economy all at the same time. And so we're doing that on our native plant nursery site in West Parkside. We're doing it in a site in North Philadelphia in the Logan section, and we're getting into a site on 60th Street in Southwest Philadelphia. So that's that, and then you can hit the next slide. So this is just a slide that kind of talks about us getting into the watersheds of Philadelphia, and I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to kind of talk about what I think some of the big connection issues we have in all throughout Philadelphia. And so so our watershed steward program is something that when Land Health was founded in 2014, one of the first things I created was something called Profess, which is the Program for Future Environmental Scientists and Stewards, as an extracurricular offering that we have to meet students where they are, and then use like a mile, about a walking radius around the school as an extended classroom. And so it was our way to get in at schools, not necessarily be confined by classrooms, and then get the kids out and about, learning about the environment around them, but also taking part in it, and then also then doing certain kinds of projects. So it's led to us greening schoolyards. Kelly School in Germantown has a really beautiful meadow in front. It's a 365-day-a-year kind of a space where students use it as a learning environment during the school year, but the neighborhood takes care of it when school's not in session. So we've done things like that. That proceeded into us getting into something that's in its fourth year, sponsored by the Philadelphia Water Department, which is another, here's that stewardship word again, a stewardship program called Philadelphia Watershed Stewards. And so in this program, our goal is to again get out and about and get the kids out. Not just like, to us, learning about the environment is one thing, but really getting familiar with it and understanding kind of our relationship with it is what we're looking for. So we're not worried about if a student memorizes what the species of a salamander is or a tree. It's more like, let's get out, let's get into the creeks, let's get into the riparian forest, let's see what's happening there. And so we have grown this program where we initially got started focusing on the Cobbs Creek watershed. And so that's what and I wanted to talk about something that fast forwards to today. So here's the issue that I see in Philadelphia and how some of our programming ties directly into it, but also it's going to culminate in me just sharing something that's really it will be a case study that we're starting now, and then I would invite anyone to kind of follow Land Health as to how this thing takes off. So here's some real, like in Philadelphia, you have this amazing, sad disconnect between neighborhoods and green space. And if you, and we do a lot of work in West Philadelphia. So if you take a hike in Cobb's Creek, and there's some really beautiful trails and stuff in there, it's not unusual if you take a hike through it for 2 hours and you might meet 2 people on the entire walk. If you go into West Fairmount Park, which is 1,400 acres, which is the second largest park in the Fairmount Park system, same thing. The trails aren't really clearly marked. You go in and out of ravines and stuff, beautiful streams, cool historic infrastructure left over. And again, you have this large park, but you have this big non-use of it. And so I think one of the biggest problems or set of issues that are related to that are that, one, there's issues of awareness. 2, there's issues of just straight out use. And then 3, there's planning decisions that often aren't the best. And so, so what we do at Land Health is when we build our stewardship programs up, and we're generally, in these cases, focusing on high school youth, we embed awareness and use from day one. And so, so an example of how we've grown throughout the Cobb's Creek watershed that's culminating in some real on-the-ground work there is that I have a background dating back to my early volunteer days with the Friends of the Wissahickon, and I was one of the initial trail ambassadors. And so stewardship, ambassadorship, using an area is kind of like in my blood dating back as long as I can remember. And so when we started with our stewardship program in Cobb's Creek, we got in and we started getting the kids directly involved really up and down the entire watershed. So whether places were well marked or not, that's, we would do that. But we would also discuss some of the, in exploring, we don't just explore, again, the names of the trees and everything, we're also exploring like what's happening on the ground. And so if we get to an area, for instance, in Haddington Woods, which is a section of Cobb's Creek, where you see these 2 immense deer exclosures, we talk about it with our stewards and say, like, what was the planning behind that? The ostensible goal is to exclude deer, but you have these big immense areas of forest in good shape with big 6 or 8 foot fences around them, bordering West Philadelphia neighborhoods, and so this whole discussion arises. This whole discussion arises on on how safe that is, like what is that. It might be keeping deer out, but it's also keeping humans out. And so what do how does that planning decision come about? And our stewards kind of discuss it, what might they do if they were in a position of leadership and planning? So by the time we had year 2, we had our stewards created a Cobb's Creek companion guide. We have this on our website, or we can get that to you electronically. But so high school kids wrote a book that has at least 51 pages in it about the precious cobs, watershed management, the history of the park, the geology. It has their own drawings and and illustrations. Here's beautiful drawings of like the Asian clam that you're going to find as an invasive species, and but our kids put together a book, so they start getting more hands-on. And now today we're teaming up with Pennsylvania Audubon. There's a site in Cobb's Creek around where Whitby Avenue crosses it that's bugged me since day one of getting involved in the Cobb's Creek area. And you have these twin meadows basically. And so the Parks Department, several years ago cleared out some playground spaces that were old and weathered. And they did one on the Philadelphia side and one on the Yaden side, but it's all part still of Fairmount Park. And they created these basic meadows without a whole lot of planning. They put a few warm season grasses in and basically kind of let the meadows alone. And so if you go there today, you find these beautiful granite steps. You walk down from Whitby Avenue and they lead you to trash that's been dumped and no clear entryway into the creek area. And so basically you have this area that could be beautiful. It gets no use by the community. It's scary there. There's dumping on a regular basis that takes place there. So what we are doing is we are doing a small restoration project, but not so small. We're going to hit, you know, we have I think a good 10 or so acres projected on either side of the creek. And it's not that, so we're not, I'm a restoration ecologist by training, but here's how we're doing restoration. Day one, that starts this month, we're doing a natural resource inventory. We're taking just basically what are the assets, both cultural, natural, that exist on both sides of the creek there. Our stewards are taking part on day one in that natural resource inventory process. And so as a professional ecologist, I've written like countless of these for different projects I've had. In our case, we are actually having the stewards write a section of our natural resource inventory, because these are like our kids, they live in this area, their families live in this area. So who knows better about issues of access and how things feel and feelings of safety than one, the eyes of young people living around there. So we are writing a plan, but when I say we, just like this is largely a book that was done by high school kids. Here, they're gonna inform a chunk of the natural resource inventory that we're then gonna go and build upon. But what that's gonna do is it's gonna inform not just like fixing up that meadow to get it beyond 4 warm season grasses into like a thriving meadow, but where should the trail entries be? How should it tie into closer to the creek? What kind of signage? But again, this isn't a bunch of professionals from out where you typically hire a landscape architecture firm coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do. It's more the community is from day one going to be involved in discussing and deciding, you know, what the best approach is. And so the last thing to add to that is we're also simultaneously now, Land Health is basically the client / participant in a class with Haverford College. And so we think that watersheds are all about, they're about the water quality, but they're about the neighborhoods. A watershed is just like, it's a wealth of neighborhoods. And Cobb's Creek actually starts out, one of its main headwater areas is actually the duck pond at Haverford College. Probably 3/4 of the students that go to Haverford College don't know that they're part of the Cobb's Creek watershed. And so our idea in a class with Haverford is to involve those students who are going to inform like some of the putting together of facilitating neighborhood involvement and who were the neighborhood groups, so that we're not necessarily just looking at Philadelphia. We're looking at Cobb's Creek as 2 main tributaries plus the main stem in places that are as far away as like Narberth and Wynwood and Haverford, all the way through into where they all come together, you know, around 69th Street area, and then pick up numerous towns from Delaware County on the Delaware County side, and then different neighborhoods in Philadelphia. And so how do we take principles of smart use, smart planning, smart ambassadorship, and again get the feedback of the individuals that live in these different neighborhoods. So we actually have a class that's going to be working on some of the neighborhood input for something like this. So I'll leave it at that. And you guys tell me, because I don't want to go over time. I did see that, should I hit the question now or later about the process to create space for that I have here?
We'll have questions at the end, but as it comes to people's mind, feel free to put them in the chat so you don't forget them.
So that's where that's where I'll leave it. But I invite people to follow Land Health if you're interested in this, because we're literally doing this fall, you know, with some initial plantings and signage slated to be taking place later this fall. So thanks.
All right, so now we're gonna have our next presenter. His name is John Harrod. He's the manager at DuPont Environmental Education Center. So welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So I work for the Delaware Nature Society, which is a statewide 501c3 profit with 4 environmental centers. And the organization's been around pushing 60 years now. But its newest site is the DuPont Environmental Education Center, which sits on the Wilmington riverfront, as you can see in this photo. And unlike our other sites that are rural or suburban, this one's as close as urban as our sites get. And we sit right on the edge of a 212-acre freshwater tidal refuge wetland system and a tidal Christina River. So this session is looking at outdoor recreation in urban settings, especially with youth, and being mindful of all the things that are going on in the news right now, all those tragic things. So what I wanted to present is really how the Delaware Nature Society has gotten to the point of doing what it's doing with the communities in Wilmington that hopefully can help other organizations do similar work. Next slide, please. So the Delaware Nature Society has a 3-pronged mission of environmental education, environmental advocacy, and environmental conservation. So we are a land trust. We do hold preserves as well as do easements. We do work with local legislators and local governments on advocacy issues and do traditional environmental education like field trips and whatnot. But when we started working at the DuPont Environmental Education Center, which was roughly 11 years ago now, we looked to do something different and not replicate that same model that works in other areas. Every audience has their own interests. So we spent a great deal of time in the Wilmington community listening and hearing what the issues are of the community. And with that, we devised what the previous slide showed to say, renew, reaching and engaging through nature to empower Wilmington. But it's basically a community-informed strategic plan for our organization on how to engage Wilmingtonians and specifically African-American youth in the city. And many of our conversations and listening sessions, and we did start an advisory committee of community members who are not necessarily environmentalists. We said, where do we start? It's a big city and we're new to town. And they said, start with the youth, especially those who are too old for after-school programming, but maybe too young for jobs. So a lot of the work that we've done has been with young people. So what we do is look at, based on what the community's told us, the environmental challenges or the environmental justice issues that they have, and see how can we address those through the lens of our mission. So many of the things that we heard from the community are talked about crime, jobs, family challenges. So we look to address those utilizing the lens of our mission so that we're staying with what we have to do. So some of those things that we do work on are career exploration and job experience. Next slide. Whether it's just exposing people to new careers or in some of the jobs that I'll mention or programs I'll mention later, actually provide paying work experience. We're also looking at expanding habits and new horizons. Many of the youth I've spoken with, I've heard various stories of why they're not using their local green space, whether they said, oh, I didn't know I was allowed to go there because 5-10 years back, something unsavory happened and the whole park got a reputation. So if we could help get the youth doing those healthy habits, whether it's taking them biking or, and on the right there, rock climbing. Other times it's looking at, we love to do the park, but we can't get to the park because it's unsafe to get to the park. So we explore with our partners, are there ways to make it safer to get to that park? When other times it's fear of low shrubbery in the park that someone might hide in. So working with partners to ensure the amenities of the park meet the concerns of the community. Next slide, please. Civic engagement. So even though a lot of the youth we work with are not of age to vote, a lot of our conversations and the work we do impresses on them that they still have a voice and they can make change. So whether it's through community projects that we do with the youth that are community-led and community-designed, or meeting legislators, that's our former Governor Markell on the left. And some of you may know Brenna Goggin, who used to work with our organization in doing advocacy for us. They're looking at how a bill comes to fruition. But we look at, you can go to your city council meetings, at least in Wilmington you can, and you can go to your civic meetings in your neighborhoods. So letting them know they have a voice, they have the power to change, and it's not just those adults that you have to wait around for. Next slide, please. So I mentioned community service. So we have various aspects of what we do in our projects. So building raised beds on the right was a project that, or here at our refuge, that's one of our green jobs programs. They're removing invasive purple loosestrife there. But again, this is just showing them that there are different ways to have an impact on your community and on your world, and getting them in the practice and habit of doing such things. Next slide, please. So some of the programs that we do, we have summer internships that are paid that actually help us engage in other programming. So they become the instructors and it's not just our core staff doing the instruction. And we have Watershed Fellows and Tykee. The next presenter will probably go into a little bit more, which is a position that we have through the Alliance for Watershed Education, which is for college age youth. Our summer interns are generally for college age youth as well. But at the same time, we do have partnerships with the city of Wilmington, where high school youth are paid by the city to work with us. So it's very cost efficient for us that these youth will help us with our summer camps and engaging the walk-in public and are earning money to do so. So very exciting opportunities that have come up in the last few years. Next slide, please. Maybe go the other direction or keep going. So I mentioned green jobs. That is a city partnership program where we partner with other organizations that are environmental in the area, such as the Nature Conservancy, state parks, and others, and have a cohort of youth that rotate through our organizations over the course of the summer doing various activities, whether it's invasive species removal, biodiversity studies, and bird counts, to just getting out in the water to explore the local waterways, to water quality monitoring, to many other things. This is a paid program and teaches some of those life skills such as showing up on time and things like that. Next slide, please. So what we try to do with our programming is make sure that we have a ladder, or in some cases a pyramid of engagement, so we don't have any dead ends. So we try to build various programs so that after someone's completed the program or they've aged out, that there is something else for them to move on to. So it's just not a dead end, or we just say goodbye and they head off to who knows where. So our programming is designed to have various programs for various groups. So I mentioned multiple ones that we have here. Next slide, please. And also we have Summer Marsh Experience, which is a week-long, actually overnight program that utilizes also our lodge at our Ashland Nature Center site. But they spend a week with us, with our partners, Delaware Futures, which is a 4-year college and career readiness program. And this is their first week as a cohort together. So they spend time doing projects. Like on the left, you'll see that they built a picnic table for our outdoor teaching area. On the right, they're doing some STEM related project, creating a remote operated vehicle submersible. But they also do take lessons such as how watersheds work and the value of wetlands, and then just team building activities. So for many of them, it's a first time in an outdoor experience this extended. And after the 4 years, they give a presentation to their class, and many of them reference this as the highlight of their program, which is 4 years long. Next slide, please. The Wilmington Youth Environmental Corps is something that we recently created in partnership with the city of Wilmington as an extension of the Green Jobs program mentioned earlier. Green Jobs is only for the summer, and for quite some time, we did not like how once the summer ends, we did not see the youth anymore. So we were able to work with them to create a school year program that meets every Thursday or so to do activities. Here they're building a birdhouse, but it's a lot of guest career folks that come in, whether it's anything in the STEM field. So it's exploratory program with activities, and they do create their own service project and perform it. And they receive a stipend for participating in this program. Next slide, please. Trail Ambassadors is very exciting. This is one that we've recently started. And this photo is post-COVID starting, you can see with the masks. But with this, we are hiring high school youth from the Wilmington community to be essentially our ambassadors and our advocates in the community, or to be, they are their ambassadors and their advocates in their community. Teaching those in the local parks that they're stationed in, or on the riverfront, on the river walk that we have, engaging them and taking the nature center to the people, knowing not everyone will come to us. And this is a year-round program, so 25 hours in the summer and 20 hours a month during the school year. And we're looking forward to progressing it the next year, where we have mentors and we add another class. And this group mentors the older class. And it's very exciting. This is a paid program as well. Next slide, please. So Tykee's next, but a few comments I want to leave is it's what we're doing. All of these programs are designed based on community input. It's community informed. So these programs aren't something we just designed on a whim and said, we'll think it works. We actually spent multiple years just listening and then having conversations, learning what the community needs are. So regardless of where you are in the US or what audience you have or whatnot, it's just listening and meeting the needs of the community. And sometimes looking outside the box on how you may be able to meet those needs. Prior to this site being open, we probably, as an organization, we were not looking at how to address social and environmental justice challenges of communities through our field trip programs, but looking at being willing to look at things in a different light and not just focus on habitat gardening, as great as it is. There's many other things that the community is interested in, whether it's water quality, flooding, litter, and making the programming that you do relevant to the community that you're working with. So with that, I will say thank you and turn it over to Tykee.
All right, so Tychi James is the next presenter. He is the Government Affairs Coordinator at National Audubon Society. And in the chat, you can see the link to the interactive slides. Yeah, so we're gonna have an activity towards the end of Tykee's presentation. All right, welcome Tychi James.
Thank you. And seeing that a lot of the time was used so generously, I am going to use some speed to go through some of the things I want to cover. So I like to describe myself as someone who is a product of the programming. And it started with belted kingfisher. And that is a picture of a bird that is on the next slide, if you believe me or not. And that bird was my spark bird that made me realize there's a career in conservation. My first job was at Cobbs Creek Environmental Education Center as a docent, you know, an interchangeable word with trail ambassador, interchangeable word with fellow, interchangeable word with steward. And, you know, and I learned a lot of and interacted with a lot of what was said here today. And now, as was mentioned, I work with the National Audubon Society, where I get to take selfies of myself with a hat and binoculars, which could be on the next slide, but we'll never know. And that has been like my journey as a birder, environmental educator, and now an advocate. I was a part of the Alliance for Watershed Education Fellowship Program. And, you know, like I said, we did take away, or at least I did, a lot of what was captured in describing what these programs were like. You know, I was college age during that program, but, you know, I was doing that stuff in Cobbs Creek way back when I was in high school. But when I went through this program, I realized there was a missing piece. There wasn't anything to keep us connected after the program left. And so that group of fellows, well, I guess I'm wearing a hoodie in both pictures. Wow. Well, the bottom picture, that is a picture of the first meeting of the River Routes, which is the alumni association for the fellows that went through that program with the Alliance for Watershed Education. And that first meeting was really fun because we had a planning part, like a steering committee, where we were going to draft a charter, establish some roles, and see what we could do to come up with a plan, because we know people wanted to fund what we wanted to do, because we were building a conservation community that not only reflected our values and what our experiences have been together, you know, working in the watershed, but we knew as a group, we are reflecting what the future of conservation is. And so we felt a sense of responsibility that the next folks that come through this program, they should feel supported by us. They should know that going through this and having this connection to the Delaware River watershed and the programs and the networks that surround it is a very important thing. And it's kind of cool because, you know, I don't know any other watershed in the US that has this going on. And so I've been recently involved with Black Birders Week, now Black Mammalogists Week. And it is a constant reminder that building a network and establishing some type of unity in purpose and experience can help advance some of those ED&I things that seem to be just outside the reach of the strategic goal or the mission. And I think that these alumni associations be enabled, should they be enabled, they can be a source, obviously, for some funding to get guest speakers, to access mentor networking. And that, you know, there are a bunch of organizations that have illustrious board members, and having access to those board members to build a network, or having knowledge of when board members are rotating off or when committee assignments change, I think that's important. And I think that we can build a network of folks that reflect the future of conservation, that reflect the values that's needed in this moment to be a part of that leadership. Because at the end of the day, it's about making a pipeline, you know, like making the fitting, making the different parts. Not everybody can create the entire system, but everybody has a role in making sure that the path to progress is a broad one. And also paying, you know, like I like the idea of, you know, people getting paid for their work, at least in this society. And I like the idea that maybe stipends could be offered to participants, to organizers, to the leaders of potential alumni associations. Now, I really do like, and I think that the present work of community-centric conservation in planning, in management, in leadership, I think all of that can't just look good on paper. That will have to be the leadership. That will have to be reflective of the leadership, so that when we are now looking at 2050, we know that the people of the global majority meaning non-white people today, will be the global majority. And so I think that we are presented at a crossroads to some extent on where are we making decisions, on how are we making decisions in reference to this fork in the road of we're at a moment where we realize more than ever, doing something is required because doing nothing is not good. So it will be interesting to see 2050, the decisions we make today, how prepared we are for that. That concludes my remarks, but I do want to show you some really cool thing that CDRW set up. So it's asking a question about temporary part-time employees, which is a general term for, again, fellows, stewards, ambassadors, fellows. And I remember I made like maybe $12 an hour, but that wasn't my only job. I had 3 other jobs at the time. And we aren't in a position to necessarily argue that we need to make more money while we're in the program. But I think part of this idea of having an alumni association and part of having your ear, at least for this moment, I would hope to ask if anyone wanted to share their thoughts on what you understand in your organization or in your program as what the current wage is, and if you think it's proper and if you think it can change. Because I know some folks, well, I can't change my wage because it's tied to the state, or I can change it, I just have to talk to the funder, and I never did. Or they make enough, they're fine. You know, so I would just love to see where people's thoughts are. I mean, you know, obviously it's anonymous, but I just think this is a good platform to ask just a broad question to see what people's thoughts are again. I want to give this a couple minutes because I'm coming up, you know, we're coming up on time. And then I'll jump to the next one just after, give people some time to reflect. I mean, how many people are on this?
In the call, there's about 50 folks, Tykee, and then on the interactive slides, there's about 20. And again, if folks want to access the slides, I put the link in the chat a handful of times, and we are on slide 69 for the interactive part.
Nice. I like the different cloud shape that shows that there's gradient within the spectrum of thinking, you know, like there's levels. Well, we're definitely short of a quorum, but I want to go on to the next question just so we can, I want to see it. Oh, people already voted. Yeah, I wanted to give out a specific number, like less than 10, more than 15, and it seems that, yeah, more than 15 seems to be the thing. It's something to think about because, you know, these are their first jobs, and this may be their first time advocating for themselves. I deserve to get paid for the labor that I do. I need to make sure that I can pay my bills and come to work and be responsible. And I want my pay to reflect that. You know, this is maybe their first time interacting with that. And so when you underpay them in the beginning, it's so much easier to do it later. So it's just, yeah, want to ask these questions, get people's thoughts. That concludes my remarks in total. So thank you.
Thanks, Tychi. And it looks like while you were talking, some other folks got to access the crossbars. So just if people wanted to see what those answers were. But I am going to stop sharing my screen now. And if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But there were 2 connected questions directed towards Scott after his session. So I'll combine them for him. So the first one was from Tim Dillingham from American Literal Society. He asked, is there a process to create space for community input, or is it more organic? And then Sarah Morales, as a follow-up, said, where did the input come from and how successful was the community input, and roughly how many people were reached?
As far as like in answer to the first question, I have a long background in just in community engagement around projects that I was in charge of. So, and I think in one of the questions, organic was used. When you interact to me with neighborhood involvement, there's like having it be as much organic involvement as possible is often the best approach. And so so our approach is to if there's an area that we start working in, we literally just we go there, we look around. If you go to different places, people and you're not from there, people ask who you are and that kind of a thing. And so there's often very really accessible organic opportunities to build questions and awareness. And then if you can when you start to have that, you know, there is some purposeful gathering that we do to solicit input and ask what people think. So it's really like a combination, and it's hard to explain in detail, except here's what it's not. It's not coming in with a huge agenda, handing out big pictures that someone did in a studio that sort of suggests that somebody's already done some planning or thought around stuff. And so that it's almost kind of like preset. It's more that you know, we work in the community of Logan. Logan has the Logan Triangle. It's 45 acres of empty space because the Winghahawken Creek was buried beneath it. It was the whole area was filled with coal ash, houses sunk, and it's been a big site of environmental injustice for decades. But when we go there, we did a guerrilla garden with the help of a community, and then it started to spawn its own attention. And then then when you interact with the citizens and the kids and stuff that come out, that's how you start getting ideas and stuff that feel organic. So I don't know if that fully answers it, but it's a combination of going, doing, being aware, and not really going with a plan other than saying, hey, we think that, you know, we want to see if we can be of help, and then get ideas from the others.
And John has some points on this question as well.
Yeah, so when it comes to community input, some of the things that we've done, especially early on, and we continue now many years in, is every few blocks in the city of Wilmington is a new neighborhood, and each neighborhood has a civic association. So then and now we go attend, not necessarily with agenda or present anything. We just sit and listen in the back and be a presence and just hear what's said, learn what's said. Not necessarily are we looking for what an environmental issue is being discussed, because it's not always the case, but what are those things that aren't being said environmentally, or what are those other things that are non-environmental? If everyone's talking about violence, it's incumbent on us to say, okay, how can we address that through our mission, and come up with some ways, and then have conversations with the community to say, here's some ways we came up with. Would those work? But in those meetings, you start relationships, and some of the things we've done since then is also some focus groups with community members specifically saying, you guys know the community, we'd like to help. Let's have an open and honest and blunt conversation about how we can get involved. And you will get that if you ask for it, which is how a lot of the programming we've done has come about, because it's been through those communities. And after those focus groups, those who are the most vocal or had the most interest in communicating with us, we created an advisory committee of members from the community, again, who aren't environmental, but care about their community and want to be able to help us work with the community. So we have an advisory committee. So those are some of the things we've done, but it's also when we go to a festival in a park and set up, you know, whatever table it might be, having those conversations, asking, what are your concerns? What are your issues? What are your interests? And just learning from the community that way. So it could be passive, where you just sit and listen, on a spectrum to explicitly asking.
And I have a question for Tykee here. And the person asks, how do you see the role as the organization that provided the initial education and programming to create an alumni program? I don't think we can hear you, Tykee.
We started it on our own initiative, but what helped us out was having a place to meet, having resources like, chairs, tables, and events that we could attend and help volunteer at, access to like the back channels. So, and I say that because the Alliance for Watershed Education is an alliance with 23, I'm not telling anybody anything new, environmental centers. And so, having access to those centers has been really helpful. And specifically, it is still like a good relationship to keep in that if these folks went through your program and you can keep track of them, you know that you can hire them later because people rotate, So it's in the interest of the institution to keep track of it without controlling it. Because the only thing it's like a plant, like just give it water, give it some money, it'll grow, it'll bloom. And, it has to be alumni led.
It looks as though those were the only questions that I'm seeing in the chat. So I'll give folks another couple of seconds if they want to finish typing. I'm also including everyone's contact information in the chat. So if you want to noodle on something and then email them, you can. Tykee, go ahead.
I wanted to also say I would be very happy to speak to any school group so that if the question is, what can I do with this experience? It's not always science. I'm an example of that. And I like to tell that story, and I hope that that can inspire them to think about, well, yeah, I can start with pulling invasive leaves, and the next thing I could do could be leading bird walks of members of Congress. So obviously cutting cheap, it's not that simple, but it's definitely something I would be happy to discuss. And if you're interested in starting an alumni association with your former program participants, let me know, because I have experience in the nomination committee, forming a charter, and then having a steering committee and all that structured stuff.
Can I tag on to what Tykee is saying there? In a similar.
Also, nice to see you again, Scott.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Yeah,
so much more hair than last time I see
you. So Tykee brings up, like I love the this whole idea of alumni, and I met Tykee when, way back, I think when he was still part of one of the programs he referenced in Cobb's Creek, and there aren't enough stories, like Tykee, quite frankly, and so but Tykee just mentioned an invitation. So every Wednesday at 4:30, like our Watershed Steward group that I talked about to some degree on my main talk here, it's grown into this thing unto itself given the pandemic, where 4:30 every Wednesday, we have this growing number of high school students that are like tuning in. And so we're very aware, as someone who's a designer and an ecologist, in the world of design and ecology and environmental science, it's a very white world. And yet a lot of these spaces that are getting designed and thought about, it's out of town white people doing that, and yet it's and people of color are the ones that are getting designed for. So the alumni thing is a great idea in that, like, we're constantly thinking of how do we know that the kids that we have captive, we only have them captive for so long, and then they have all these different trajectories, and how do we put a bug in them, a good bug, by the way, that does enable them to grow from it. And so but one of the things that we do, and here's the invite, is we try to expose them to as many different people and organizations and stories as possible. So like if anyone has an interest in sharing your story, you could literally, like we have the forum, and we have captive kids from all across Philadelphia. And it really is, I think, exposing them to like stories like Tykee that further puts the seeds for alumni in there. So I just wanted to tag on that.
All right, folks. And with that, it looks as though we're at the end of our sessions. So I'm going to stop the recording, and our next session is at 1 p.m. and it's how water utilities are adapting in the face of a pandemic. So I hope to see many of you there. Thank you all.